Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasul Kareem. Alhamdulillah, today we want to speak about one of the great scholars of Islam, namely Abdur-Rahman Ibn Al-Jawzi. And with us today is Shaykh Abu Ja Al-Hanbali. Welcome and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ya Shaykh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
So, to jump into the life of the Imam, I wanted to ask you, could you tell us about the life of the Imam? Where did he grow up? How did he grow up and his studies and the like?
Okay. Alhamdulillah. Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. So when discussing the Imam, let's look at his name. He is Abdur-Rahman ibn Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Ubaidullah ibn Abdullah ibn Hamada ibn Ahmed ibn Muhammad ibn Ja'far ibn Abdullah ibn Al-Qasim ibn Al-Nadr ibn Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Abdur-Rahman ibn Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr al-Siddiq radiyallahu anhum ajma'een al-Qurshi al-Taymi al-Bakri al-Baghdadi. So the Imam is a direct descendant of Abu Bakr al-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu through Al-Qasim. He is known as Al-Hafiz, the memorizer of Hadith, Al-Mufassir, the Quran and Hadith commentator, Al-Faqih, the fiqh scholar, Al-Wa'id, the preacher, Al-Adib, the teacher of adab and etiquettes. His laqab is Jamaluddin, and his kunya is Abul-Faraj. He's known as Shaykh Waqtihi, the Shaykh of his time, wa Imam Asrihi, and also one of the Imams of his era. He is more popularly known as Ibn Al-Jawzi. Now, in considering his name, Ibn Al-Jawzi, there's a discussion that Ibn Rajab mentions in volume 3 of Tabaqat al-Hanabila. He mentions about the name Ibn Al-Jawzi. In one report, it said that his grandfather, Ja'far, is called Jawza in reference to an area in Al-Basra called Jawza. It said that it's also in reference to a river, which is that boats would travel over along the canal in Al-Basra. Al-Mundhiri said there's an area in Al-Basra that was called Fardatul Jawz. The Sheikh Abdul Samad ibn Abil Jaysh said that it's an actual location in Al-Basra called Al-Jawz. Still another one said that it's in reference to a house that he had in Wasit. So these are the possibilities of why it was known as Ibn al-Jawzi. There's a dispute about the exact date of his birth within 2 years. Right? Some say that he was born in the year 508. Al-Qadisi said that he asked his brother, Abu Muhammad, about it, Ibn al-Jawzi's brother, and he said that date. Another account said 509, another said 510. However, Imam Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, rahimahullah, whose tarjuma we're reading from, he said that he found in the handwriting of Ibn al-Jawzi, because his books are widely diffused, that he said that he didn't know exactly when he was born, other than that he knew his dad died in the year 514. And his mother said that when his dad died, Imam Ibn al-Jawzi was 3 years old, which means that he was born 511. Right. Al-Qati'i, the big alim, asked Imam al-Jawzi rahimahullah about his date of birth, to which he said, I can't be sure, except that I'm pretty sure that I came to my adulthood in the year of the death of our Shaykh Ibn al-Zaghuni, who died in the year 527. So this means that he was born after the year 510. It's also said that his first book that he authored was in the year 528 of the Hijri. And he was 17 years of age when he authored his first book. So that means he was born 511 of the Hijri. Now, as for his name, his actual name is Al-Mubarak. And he was called by this name until the year 520 of the Hijri. Now, he and his brothers were given other names by the Sheikh Ibn Nasir. He and his brothers were given the names Abdullah, Abdur-Rahman, and Abdur-Razaq. And those names are actually kunyas. His actual name is Al-Mubarak. He was born in Baghdad into a noble household. His father died when he was 3 years of age. So his mother and his paternal aunt looked after him. His family were merchants that dealt with copper as well as other minerals. He also, in his Sama'at, mentioned that his name was mentioned that Ibn Al-Jawzi, the coppersmith. So it's shown that that's the family that he came from. The first Sama'at that he was ever part of was in the year 516. So this means he was very young. He was about 6 years of age. He memorized the Quran in his early life and recited the qira'at to a group of imams of qira'ah. He narrated to Ali ibn al-Baqillani and also listened to qira'at and recited by himself a great deal. And also sought books a great deal. One of his first sheikhs was Shaykh Ibn Nasir, who sat with him and took him to other sheikhs while he was young. Sheikhs like Awali and Ibn al-Zaghuni, who was known for his knowledge of usul and other affairs. He heard from a large body of scholars, but he condensed their knowledge and then reread it to other big scholars besides them. People such as Ibn al-Husayn, al-Qadi, Abu Bakr al-Ansari, Abu Bakr al-Mazrafi, Abu al-Qasim al-Hariri, Ali ibn Abdul-Wahid al-Dinuri, Abu Sa'adat al-Mutawakkili, Abu Ghalib ibn al-Banna, his brother Yahya, Abu Abdullah al-Bari', Abu al-Hasan Ali ibn Ahmed al-Muwahid, Abu Ghalib al-Maturidi, Abu al-Hasan ibn al-Zaghuni, Abu Mansur ibn Khayrun, Abu al-Qasim al-Samarqandi, Abdul-Wahhab al-Anmati, Abdul Malik al-Karuhi, Abu al-Qasim Abdullah ibn Muhammad al-Asbahani, Abu Sa'ad al-Zurzini, Abu Sa'ad al-Baghdadi, Yahya ibn al-Tarrah, Ismail ibn Abi Salih, Abu al-Qasim Ali ibn Ma'ala al-Alawi al-Harwi, Abu Mansur al-Qazzaz, Abdul Jabbar ibn Ibrahim and Abdul Wahhab Mandah, and he also has narrations from many scholars besides. He listened to the Sihah Kutub, like the Musnad, Tirmidhi, the Tarikh Baghdad from Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi and others, and he gathered them together in one huge volume in order to review it, do regular review of the hifz of these. He listened to the Sahih al-Bukhari from Abul Waqt. He listened to Sahih Muslim as well as Ibn Abi Dunya and other books. He was very, very young at the time of hearing these, around 10 or 11 years of age. Ibn Nasir then took him to Abul Qasim al-Alawi al-Harwi in the year 520 of the Hijri. So he was 19 years of age. He then learned about the way to speak, grammar. He listened to the great scholars of Baghdad. He sat and listened to them and watched them sit on the minbar and narrate a hadith. He watched people speak, such as Abul Hasan ibn al-Zaghuni, and he stayed with him, narrated fiqh from him, and more. He also learned fiqh with Abu Hakim and Abu Ya'la ibn al-Farra. This is the Abu Ya'la, this is the son of Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la al-Baghdadi, the elder. This is his son, right? So he learned from him early on, okay? He also, after the death of Ibn al-Zaghuni, he recited fiqh and the laws of ikhtilaf and discussion and usul to Abu Bakr al-Dinuri and Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la al-Saghir. Al-Qadi Ya'la al-Saghir, this is the grandnephew of Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la. He died 560 Hijri, right? So we're already familiar with that family. He read to Abu Hakim al-Nahrawani, as well as Mufid, the head of the madrasa, to the degree that Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi rahimahullah, around 11 or 12, he became one of the supervisors at the madrasa. Right, because that shows us just he had a love for knowledge. And right,
all of these studies they're being taken in Baghdad.
Yes, he's doing all these studies in Baghdad. Imam al-Jawzi rahimahullah, he did not venture out. And it makes sense why, because at this time Baghdad is called Qubatul Islam, the dome of Islam. It's also referred to as Darus Salam, right, the abode of peace, because you had mathematicians that were coming from India and Greece and Byzantine. So people were coming from all over to come there. If they weren't there, they would come to Andalus. And sometimes there was cross-pollination between Andalus and them, because Al-Qurtubi cites Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi in his tafsir. So there's cross-pollination between them because they were contemporaneous to one another. So this is a very important time. Damascus was rising up in knowledge, but it hadn't yet become the jewel, because Baghdad would have to be taken out before that happened.
Right.
So he also recited the laws of adab and akhlaq to Abu Mansur al-Jawaliqi. And as we mentioned, when Ibn al-Zaghuni died in the year 527, Imam al-Jawzi rahimahullah sought to assist by entering in and leading the halaqah of Ibn al-Zaghuni. Now you have to remember now, this is 527. Imam al-Jawzi was born 511. Okay, so he's 16, 17 years of age, but he wants to lead the halaqah.
Amazing.
And they said, we're not going to give that to you, too small. But he said, I'm an adult. Let me lead. So they gave him permission in Jami' al-Mansur to lead the halaqah. And it's at this point, not long after, he authors his first book. Now he starts taking from a body of scholars. In addition to being at the halaqah, he's also taking from a large body of scholars, fuqaha of many different types. And he became popularly known as Shaykh Abul-Faraj from that point. He started gathering books together, gathering knowledge, and he began his life of authorship. He fasted throughout the year, not taking anything off except for the 2 Eids. Other than that, he either fasted every day or every other day. He was strict on his zuhud. He believed that ilm, knowledge of the revealed law, was better than any other optional action. So he regularly stayed on it. وَنَظَرَ فِي جَمِيعِ الْعُلُومِ, and he delved into the examination of all the sciences. وَأَلَّفَ فِيهَا, and he authored. Now, Jami' al-Ulum, then another says, fi Jami' al-Funun. He even went into Funun. So these are things outside of the revealed law. astronomy, math, these other things. وألف فيها, and he authored books in it. Authored books in it. And most of what he gathered together of his sciences, he took from books that he gathered together. He was high in stature and rank. And this was during the time of Al-Wazir ibn Hubayra, who was another big imam in that time, who Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah was coming up just behind him and was gathering knowledge. And every Jum'ah, he would speak in his gathering. Now, when Al-Mustanjid became the Khalifa, then Shaykh Abdul-Qadir Al-Jilani rahimahullah was during this time of big rank. And Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah was also in that gathering for tafsir. And this is attested to by a Tazifi in his Jalal al-Khawatir, as well as in Al-Minhaj al-Ahmad, that Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah was a student of Shaykh Abdul-Qadir Al-Jilani and one of his imams after. Right, so some people act as if it's apocryphal that Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah had met or was in the gatherings of Shaykh Abdul-Qadir Al-Jilani, but this can be attested to by Tazifi as well as in Al-Minhaj al-Ahmad and other kutub that clearly places Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah in those gatherings in which he heard the tafsir and other writings. So he is he's one of the inheritors of Shaykh Abdul-Qadir Al-Jilani rahimahullah. He also was given permission to be in gatherings and to teach at Jami al-Qasr. Right, he was very firm and very focused on his studies and learning in addition. Now, at this point, he saw people, he said himself, a point came where you started finding people speaking on topics that were bid'ah. And then you also found people getting involved in ta'assub in the madhhabs. But Allah, glorified and exalted be He, gave me strength against these people because He made our word the highest. Right? So what that meant is a word that was above bid'ah and a word that was above ta'assub for the madhabs as well. Because you have to walk a middle ground. Right? Whether that be in fiqh, whether that be you have your preferences, but it can't transgress the bounds to where you lose track of, to where you start disparaging like the other three A'immah and things like this. This is despicable. So it was because of this that Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah, he stamped down the ta'assub regarding the madhahib and ta'assub regarding bid'ah as well. Because at this point you still had some of the Abbasid imams that were dallying around with Twelver or Ismaili theology. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Imam Jawzi rahimahullah strength over them. Yes.
The ta'assub in the madhahib, was that happening in Al-Baghdad itself?
Yes, this was happening in Baghdad. Yes.
At the time, what was actually the dominant madhab in Al-Baghdad?
Baghdad and Iraq, the dominant period at that time were the Hanabila, but the government was using the Hanafi school, right? Because the Mu'tazila had gone in there, and still the Hanafis were primarily Mu'tazila in the Muslim West, right? So what was happening is they were writing the usul books, and a lot of fanaticism was happening. Yes. And the same thing was happening with some of the other madhahib. By responding to the Hanafis, they would try to weaken their evidences, like to say, okay, well, your ahadith are all da'if, and then say, okay, in response, well, yours is da'if. And none of the such is true. None of the sort is true. I know madhab is just based upon batil or da'if or wahin. It's not true, right? So this has to be discarded, right? The Shaykh also, Imam Jawzi rahimahullah, was known, Ibn Rajab said, for manifesting love and praise of the Sunnah. The early generations, Imam Ahmed and his companions, and he disparaged whoever opposed them. And he mentioned those who opposed them in explicit statements regarding principles in the revealed law, especially on the topic of the Quran, the speech of Allah, and similar things to this. And he wrote numerous books that preached against other doctrines. He said one day on the minbar, the people of innovation say, there is no one above the sky, there's nothing in the mushaf of the Quran, and there is no prophet in the grave. These are three shames against you. Fear Allah. So one day there's a man that came to Baghdad. His name was Barwi. And he began disparaging the Hanbalis a great deal. But not long after, he suddenly died of an illness.
Oh.
During those days, the Shiites were gaining strength because of the Khalifas. And a large body of them came out to meet Ibn Jawzi. But the one that came forward by the name of Ambat fell down and died suddenly.
Oh.
And when this happened, they became afraid of Imam Jawzi.
Oh.
The Sheikh sat down after that and he said at the beginning, he said, how many an innovator has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala laid low because of disparagement of the companions of Imam Ahmed?
Allah.
In any one day in the disrespect he showed towards them. If you seek a long life, refrain from this. If you so desire this, you shall certainly die. If you want to bring about good, then refrain. Al-Barawi died and Anbat al-Aswad died. Be careful that which you bring about. Right? And we have a similar situation with Imam Wafiddin Qudam rahimahullah, where someone was disparaging him and the Hanabila, and that person became quadriplegic.
Wow.
And Imam came and made dua for him and everything else. It's not a game to disparage the righteous Imams. Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah, he read books of fiqh and he taught and also learned further on inheritance and math and other affairs. During the khilaf of the next Khalifa by the name of Al-Mustadi, the connection between the Sheikh and the Khalifa, because he asked him about many things, and the Shaykh Ibn Al-Jawzi rahimahullah answered his questions. Now, Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah, he authored a book for him because he asked him to author a book on numerous topics. And Imam Al-Jawzi authored a book called Al-Misbah Al-Mudi fi Dawlat Al-Mustadi, right, which were a selection of preachings against innovation, which had to do with a lot of the people around the Khalifa. So the Twelvers, the Ismailis, and other groups.
So the administration of the Khalifa, the people around him, they would be Shiites.
That's it. And the Imam authored a book on this. Then he authored another book in which he preached directly to Al-Mustadi regarding Egypt and the Fatimiyya.
Mm-hmm.
And because of this book, the Fatimiyya's strength and the Ubaydiyyin, it began to wane. And he called this An-Nasr al-Masr, the assistance against Egypt, meaning those rulers and those people. Now, in the year 568 Hijri, Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah came and sat and began gatherings and started preaching at Bab Badr, which was not far from the Khalifa's residence. And the Khalifa would give him gifts from Bayt al-Mal, even though sometimes he's preaching against the things the Khalifa is doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it shows the strength of Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah.
Now, at this point, he's probably in his 50s. And at that time, at what age was it the norm for someone to become an alim, or at what age was he declared an alim actually?
Well, at this point, we see that Imam Jawzi rahimahullah is given authority at the time where he takes over Ibn Zaghuni's majlis.
Okay.
It's at that point that he's so he peaked early. He had a peak very early, in just as much the same way as you have Imam Ibn Qudam rahimahullah reaching his marja'iyah when he's writing al-Mughni's, the Sharh on al-Mukhtasar, when he's 18, 19. Right? Now, Ibn al-Jawzi reaches his marja'iyah later on around the time of Mustadi, but he was already an alim by the time he takes over Ibn Zaghuni's majlis, which now we're talking about 12, 13, something around that time.
Right.
Yeah, so this is very early on. So he reached his peak very early, and then he had a very long career. Very long career. So Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah, he said about himself one day, he said, the people took up places from duha time for the majlis after Asr. And at this time, there were stores and shops that were open, but people used to close them up and come to listen. I used to speak weekly. And Abul-Qadir Al-Qazwini would also speak weekly. My gathering was quite large, but then his gathering was quite small. Then the news spread that the leader of the believers, the Khalifah of the time, didn't attend any gathering except for mine. And that happened 3 times in the month. Then there came to me while I was at Bab Badr on the day of Arafah, a large gathering of people, and they sat listening to what I was teaching from the time of duha. And this time was a very hot day, and the people were all fasting. This is on the day of Arafah, so it's the 9th of Dhul Hijjah. So people sat there in the masjid at the gate, exposed to the beating down sun, listening to him preach this whole time from duha. So this is from sunrise all the way up until about an hour before dhuhr, just before dhuhr, listening to all this time. They're fasting and it's hot. The Imam goes on to say, a number of amazing things happened at this time. And a number of wonderful things occurred, to the degree that this year brought about blessings in which there was a gathering in the Jami al-Mansur on the 10th of the month. And a huge gathering came that was close to 100,000 people. And I was asked a number of questions to which I answered. So the Imam rahimahullah answered a large amount of questions on different topics. Now, in this year, and that year that he was there, where he was answering these questions, it looks to be that this year was 569. And he said that was the year that he finished his tafsir, which is Zad al-Masir fi ilm al-Tafsir. And he did that, he recited that tafsir on the mimbar over the year. And after he finished, he prostrated, says it to shukr for having completed it all. And the people prostrated with him as well, says it to shukr. So he carried this out. Now, he actually wrote a series of books of tafsir. So the Zad al-Masir fi ilm al-Tafsir, which originally he started it out to be much larger, but he decided to curtail it because there was some complaints it was too long. Then he has a smaller tafsir, which is about 2 volumes, and a smaller one than that, which gives a discussion on rare words in the Quran, rare unusual words in the Quran that aren't in circulation in spoken Arabic anymore. So he has a book on that. And then there's a bigger book, which has admonitions and advices in the Quran. And then there's another one on the Ulum and the Funun that come from the Quran. So he put together about 5 or 6 books on Ulum of Quran.
Are these still extant today?
Yes, they're still extant. I have all the ones on Funun and his tafsir one. I taught Zad al-Masir fi ilm al-Tafsir. It took me 5 years to get through that tafsir, which in printing is four volumes. But if you get the Dar Hazm edition, it's 1 big volume. But it's a fantastic tafsir because there are 4 different types of tafsir. 4. You have your hadith based, you have your ahkam based, you have your lugha, another based, and then you have one that gathers between all the other ones. And Zad al-Masir fi ilm al-Tafsir is one of the ones that gathers between all of them. And it's an absolutely fantastic tafsir. If you want a tafsir in which you say, okay, I want to have the best of all the tafsir. I want some ahadith, some narratives, some language things, some comparison of ayah to ayah. I want some of these. Okay, that's the tafsir.
And
that's the tafsir.
It is an intermediate level tafsir, isn't it?
Yes, it's an intermediate level. The class, when I first started reading it out, they kind of laughed, but they laughed and kind of shocked because he said, I wrote this tafsir in order to make it easy so that students might be able to memorize it.
Right, I remember
And
that.
they were in shock, because they're thinking,
SubhanAllah.
wait a minute, this is 4 volumes. It took us about a year to get through Surah Al-Baqarah. And I'm not reading slow as molasses. I'm reading at a moderate pace, but we're going through. But then sometimes I also have to stop and flesh out some of his points, because there's a level that he's writing to that he assumes that people are aware of. And so you have to do this and explain, here he's talking about this. Here he's making reference to this. You have to be very particular, because he really brings up a lot of points. And his level of knowledge, it makes you understand this is what was in Baghdad at this time.
MashaAllah.
This is what was in Baghdad.
And just one thing on that tafsir, it gives you also different opinions on the ayat, right? It's not one mu'tamad opinion that he gives.
Yes, he'll give several statements on an ayat. And sometimes he'll bring up the other madhahib, where he'll say, now, with regards to this, is the fidya due to this issue? There's an ikhtilaf about this. So he'll quote Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Malik, and if there's more than one qawl, if there's like 2 and 3 aqwal from Imam Ahmad, these are the aqwal. And then sometimes he'll give his own position. Like he'll say, now my ijtihad is this, right? He also does a brilliant job of discussing what ayat are abrogated, what aren't. How many ayat are in each surah? How many letters and words are there? Whether it's from Mecca or Al-Madinah, right? How many ayat of ahkam there are in that surah. I mean, the level of his depth is unprecedented. It really is, because I've read Tafsir ibn Kathir, which is really the Mukhtasar of Tabari. I've read Mawardi's, Ibn Atiyah, let's see, Al-Baghawi, Ash-Shanqiti is one of the more modern ones, fantastic tafsir. Al-Alusi, right? These tafsir, they're great, but what they are is they each belong to their own genre. Ibn Kathir, hadith based, right? Shanqiti, Quran with Quran tafsir, right? Ibn Atiyah is more ahkam and narrative based. Qurtubi is ahkam and narrative based, right? Baghawi, ahkam and narrative based, right? Mawardi is very short and choppy, right? But Ibn Al-Jawzi draws between all of that. And so that gives you a good helping of each of the different types of tafsir. Also the qira'at as well. So he'll say this ayah can be recited this way or this way, right? Which is important because he's going to be reciting Qanun or Warsh. So he'll then explain this can be recited in this way, in this fashion. And it sometimes will affect the hukm as well. If it's like, if an ayah is like masakin versus miskeen, right? How does that affect the hukm, right? Poor, needy person versus needy people, right? How does that affect the ruling? Right? It's fantastic. It's fantastic. It was an utter pleasure to go through that tafsir. It was a pleasure to go through it. And there were times where Shaitan tried to like delay it or to do different things. We went through so many different changes, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it possible for us to complete it.
May Allah reward and accept it from you.
Allah accept it, because it was a huge endeavor, and it was introducing Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah to a crowd that had never seen it, introducing the Quran, the entire tafsir, to say, okay, listen, if you want the tafsir on this, even if people say, well, I don't have time to listen to the whole tafsir. Okay, well, pick up the surah you want to have the tafsir of. Because the surahs are broken down individually. Just open that up and say, okay, well, today I'm going to listen to Surah An-Nahl. I'm just going to listen to the tafsir of that. Or today I'm going to listen to Surah Yasin. I'm just going to listen to the tafsir of that. Fine, alhamdulillah. Benefit in whatever way possible. That's what it's there for.
Exactly.
Now, the Imam, rahimahullah, he also went on to mention that some of the companions of the school of Imam Abu Hanifa around the time of iftar were asking him about a ruling. And at the time about someone who ate forgetfully. And Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah said, well, that's happened to me. And so because of that, they said, well, how could you eat forgetfully in Ramadan? This is more based on ta'assub, like how could you eat forgetfully? We're all clear that eating forgetfully in Ramadan is pardonable. It's not sinful or anything. But they raised a big issue about it and tried to get him in trouble with the Khalifa.
Oh.
But they failed. There was also an incident in which they tried to get him in trouble by asking him particular questions about the Khalifa, such as whether people should rise up against him and whether certain things like that should be done.
Mm-hmm.
To which the Imam rahimahullah, he said that would only be if he committed kufr or similar things. They asked him about Shiite matters, right? And Imam said rahimahullah, I knew they were going to do this because rafad, which is the word for Shiism, during these days was quite abundant. And so I knew that eventually they were going to come to me.
And
right?
These Ahnaf, they were not Mu'tazila, right?
No, the ones that came against, they were Mu'tazila. So the Twelvers that came against him, and you have to remember, so you have the Hanafis and the Twelvers working together in that government, but it's only because they shared the same theology. They were both Mu'tazila.
Okay.
Otherwise, they would have never worked together. They would never work together.
Right.
So the Imam rahimahullah mentioned that there were people that sought to move against him because of the statements he'd made on the minbar and in his gatherings against the Twelvers, but they were never able to get the people to move against him because of the love that he had from the laity, and the love, even though some of the Khulafa did not agree with him, the love that he had from the Khulafa. He had a tremendous amount of love from the Khulafa. He only had one issue that got to him, which was the grandson of Shaykh Abdul-Qadir Al-Jilani, rahimahullah. When Imam Al-Jawzi questioned some of the Shaykh's statements, because the Shaykh was known to possess some ta'assub, that Imam Al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, wound up being put in jail in Al-Wasit for about 5 years. Because Rukn ad-Din, the grandson, who was a Twelver Shia, put the understanding out in the air that Imam Jawzi rahimahullah had like lowered the rank of Shaykh Abdul-Qadir Al-Jilani, or like he'd accused him of innovation or something like this. And you have to understand, then as well as now, the Shaykh Abdul-Qadir Al-Jilani rahimahullah, his karramat are mutawatir, and his rank is without question. So what was despicable was how this was done. It took advantage of people, and it got him in trouble for something that he really didn't do. And so he wound up in jail for about 5 years.
But just one clarification. The grandson that we're talking about, this is the grandson of Shaykh Abdul-Qadir Al-Jilani.
Yes, that's right.
And this grandson was a Shiite.
That's correct. He became corrupted and left his grandfather's legacy and got mixed up in a whole bunch of foolishness.
And what was exactly the reason? What was the purpose behind putting Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi? Was it really because of the statements?
It wasn't the statements, because in the Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi rahimahullah showed such great hostility to people of innovation, in particular Twelvers at that time. Rukn ad-Din was 12er. So he began to use other methods to get him in trouble, one of which was, he lowered the rank of Shaykh Abdul-Qadir Al-Jilani, he did this, he did that. And so it caused a real serious problem for the Imam, which led to his imprisonment. And so he would get out after 5 years and have his name cleared. But he was also sick for a period of time. And so a lot of his beard hair fell out. And so it had to grow back. And there was a lot of things like that happened to him, where he went through a lot of tribulation, tremendous amount of tribulation. Now, when he was free, he said, it occurred to me on this day that I would author a number of books in every science And so I decided I was going to establish 5 madrasas, author several books, my intention being 150 authored works in each fen, in each subscience. And also during his lifetime, there were more than 100,000 people that repented and came to the deen during his time. And he said, the truth of the matter is Allah has blessed me, in which I've not seen a gathering of preaching like my gatherings or anything like this. But the truth was manifested.
Is he making these statements after his imprisonment, after he has been released?
Yes, because he's looking over the wider aspects of his life and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed him to do. So then he went on another huge writing project. And it's known of him from his writing projects that part of his regular amal is he would do a khatam of the Quran every 7 days. He never left from his house except to go to the central masjid for Jum'ah, to establish a majlis. He did not stop and joke with anyone, nor play with any little children. He never ate in the nightlife. So there was a nightlife in Baghdad in his time. He never ate out because he wasn't sure about where he was eating from. And he stayed like that until the day that he died. And this was said of him by his son as well as his grandson. He had a tremendous love for hadith, and he spoke very little. But when he did, he spoke firmly. He did not have a deep voice, but neither was it high. His gatherings were gatherings of goodness and ihsan, in which large amounts of people all around Baghdad would come together and they would listen. Amounts that would range from sometimes 100,000 to 150,000. And listen, it's hard to get that for games, like live games, live football games, pre or post COVID. You're not going to get 150,000 people in a stadium, right? But this is what was happening. People were coming for the ilm, right? And so he would recite his kutub on things like Manaqib al-Imam Ahmed, the virtues of Imam Ahmed, and other kutub in ahadith and other affairs. He's referred to by the people, our Sheikh, the Imam Jamaluddin Ibn Al-Jawzi, the carrier of many authored works, right? The Hafiz Ibn al-Dabisi said that Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah was the author of an enormous amount of works: tafsir, fiqh, hadith, preaching, heart softeners, history, and other things. The level of hadith knowledge and its sciences that he had was to its highest level. He knew what was sahih, what was not sahih. He knew what was musnad, what was not, the different narrators of the ahadith, the different rulings in fiqh. And he had no need of fabricated or weakened ahadith that were broken in transmission or were not fully accounted for. And when he gave preaching or addresses, all eyes were always watered with tears. So these are some of the things that we can say about the Imam in his life. He stated himself on one occasion that the first book I authored was when I was 13 years of age, and it was called ثبت التصانيف المتعلقة بالقرآن وعلوم, the affirmation and authored works connected to the Quran and its sciences. That was the very first book that he ever authored. He says of his own accord that he authored 1,000 books without counting the volumes, but 2,000 if you count each volume.
Subhanallah.
Now, we don't know of anyone in history who's authored by their own hand. We're not talking about a computer. By their own hand, who's authored more books than him. His rank is attested to by many different scholars. For example, Imam Wafiquddin al-Qudam rahimahullah said, "Kan Ibn Al-Jawzi Imam ahli asrihi fil wa'ad." Imam Al-Jawzi was the Imam of his people in preaching. وصنف في فنون العلم تصانيف حسنة. And he authored in the different branches of knowledge many different good works. وكان صاحب قبول. He is acceptable in his transmission. وكان يدرس الفقه. He taught fiqh and learned it and authored things in it. He was a memorizer of hadith, authored on a topic. We were just not happy with some of his works that he authored on the topic of the Sunnah, nor the path that he followed, nor the path that he followed in it. They're talking about i'tiqad, right? So listen, we didn't like what he said on that topic and what he authored, the path that he chose to follow on that topic. We didn't like that. Right? That's what they said about him. He was, other than this, it was also said of him that Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah narrated once that he saw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a dream 3 times on 3 different occasions. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered him to be patient.